For this stocking today, I'm going to be using a pretty snowflake fabric for the lining and the cuff. I'm going to be using a gray for the main fabric, and I'm going to be using a burlap overlay on that gray flannel. The first thing you'll want to do is head to my website and print off the free pattern. This pattern's available in several sizes, and I'm going to be making the size medium today. When you print out the pattern, you're going to want to print it out twice. Cut it once on the solid line for the main fabric and once on the dotted line for the lining. Let's get started. If you're interested in the basic stocking construction, you can go ahead and look at the video linked in the description below. I'm going to begin by cutting 2 rectangles that are big enough for my stocking pattern, and I'm going to leave a little bit of space around the edges. So I'm simply going to cut my flannel fabric here into 2 pieces. And so I now have 2 rectangles. Okay. I'm going to do the same for the burlap. I'm going to do my best to make sure that this is on the straight grain so that my little woven fibers are going the correct direction. And I'm going to cut my burlap the same size as my flannel rectangles. Then I'm going to take one of my flannel rectangles and lay it right side up. And I'm going to take my burlap rectangle and lay it right side up on top of it. And again, I'm going to try and make sure it's really straight. And I'm going to put a few pins to hold this in place. Then I'm going to take my pattern and lay it on top of my fabric, and I'm going to trace around the edge. I'm just using a Sharpie because I really want to be able to see it. I'm now going to head to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew the flannel to the burlap with a 1/4 inch seam allowance away from my line. I'm doing this because I don't want to have to worry about the burlap fraying or coming unraveled or getting messed up. So I'm just going to sew it first and then cut it on my line after. Again, I'm going to be sewing a 1/4 inch away from my drawn line all the way around. And I'm just using a basting stitch, so stitch length 5. Now that I've stitched all the way around, I'm going to cut my fabric out on the line. Once you finish, you want to repeat this process again for the other side. Just be careful, you need to have mirror images, so when you trace the stocking the second time, make sure that the printed side of the paper is facing down. And that way they'll be going 2 different directions. The next thing we're going to do is decorate our stocking. You do need to remember that you're going to have a cuff covering part of your stocking. So if you go back to your pattern, you can see where the cuff line is, which is right here. And so this fabric will be folded down. There will be a seam allowance, but you kind of get the general idea. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this down just so I remember not to place anything in that location, because that's where my cuff will be. And you can really do anything you want here. You could stitch words, you could do snowmen, you could do anything you like. The size of letters you need, as well as what letters you need, will vary depending on what you choose to write. I'm going to write the word snow down here on my stocking. But what I like to do is go to my computer and choose a big blocky font and then print it out and trace it. And I want to take into account where the cuff is going to be. There will be a seam allowance, but I'm thinking I probably want my letters to be about 8 inches in total with space. So I'm going to consider that when I type my font. I've traced my letters onto my flannel fabric. I traced the letters with an air erase marker, and I'm going to place them where I'd like them on my stocking. You'll notice that I haven't cut the letters out yet. I'm actually going to stitch them in place first. So I'm going to really carefully make sure that they're centered and spaced the way I want them to be spaced. I've stitched around all of the letters, and now I'm going to use some really sharp scissors to cut around the letters. I'm using applique scissors today, but any that are pretty small and sharp should probably work just fine. Be really careful because you want to make sure that you don't cut the burlap. So just take your time and go slow on this. I'm cutting about 1/8 of an inch or so away from my sewn lines. I've cut out all the letters on my stocking, and now what I want to do next is I want to kind of distress the edges. Since this is looking like a bit of a rustic stocking, I don't want the edges to be super crisp, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run my fingernail along the edges of the flannel letters to kind of give it a little rough texture. If you don't like that, if you prefer your edges to be more crisp, before you sew your letters on, you may want to put some interfacing on the back of your lettering fabric, and that might help it to hold its shape. Also, the letters that I'm working with here are about 1.5 to 2 inches tall. I don't know if I'd go much smaller than that. If your letters are any smaller than that, they'd probably be pretty hard to work with. And so if you need more letters, you might want to try a bigger size stocking. I'm making the medium here today. Or you may want to try a different method for adding your letters, such as perhaps fabric paint or hand stitching. They're all good ideas. But you can just be creative, and really you can decorate your stocking however you want. So if you don't want words, you definitely don't have to use them. Just whatever you prefer is awesome. So I'm going to keep distressing my letters, and then I'll come back. Now that I have the letters all stitched on and distressed around the edges, I'm going to add my final decoration. I'm going to use yarn and a needle to add some little snowflakes around the word snow. I'm just going to use a back stitch. If you need to know how to do that, you can look at the video linked below for my name tag stitch sampler, which shows you how to do that stitch. I've found when sewing the details by hand, it is really important that you keep your fabric flat so it doesn't get pulled funny. Make sure to hide the knots on the back of the fabric. I've finished adding my snowflakes and now I'm ready to complete my stocking. I'm going to follow the instructions given in the simple stocking video, which is linked below. So if you'd like to see how to finish the stocking up, go ahead and click on that video, and the construction is exactly the same. Thanks for watching. Happy sewing and happy holidays.